Hey fellow tankers, it's Mobius Y here once again with the third episode in the Road to the T110E4 grind series. And here in episode 3 we are looking at the Tier 7 T25-2 US turreted tank destroyer. Now this is a tank that gets a lot of bad reputation, and I think a large part of this is because it comes straight after the Hellcat, which in my opinion is an overhyped tank. It's definitely a very popular tank, it's a very good tank, fun to play tank, but in my opinion the T25-2 I was able to perform more consistently with it than the Hellcat. Don't get me wrong, the Hellcat was very fun to play. I had some monster games with the Hellcat, but I was much more impressed with the T25-2, how well it handled and how well it could perform. Now, that being said, this is one of those tanks that really depends on the player. If you're an above average player and you play a lot of light tanks and medium tanks in particular, you're used to low penetration guns, or lower penetration guns I should say, then the T25-2 won't feel as out of place. But if you play a lot of high power tank destroyers with really high alpha guns, really high penetration guns, as well as heavy tanks that have similar gun characteristics, really high alpha, good penetration, and is in particular quite a good amount of armor, then the T25-2 might very well be a struggle for you. The packages on the T25-2 are not cheap. If you have not gone down the previous US tank destroyer line for the T110E3, then the gun upgrades on this tank will not be cheap whatsoever, especially if you have none of the engines researched on this tank, and you can be stuck on this for a while, as it's over 100,000 XP to get to the T28 prototype from a fully upgraded T25-2. So that being said, what are some good things about the T25-2? Well, it's got really good gun depression. 10 degrees of gun depression, 25 degrees of gun elevation. So that alone makes it really good at ridge fighting. Ridge fighting peekaboo tactics are your best friend with this tank. You peek over a ridge when either nobody's looking at you or people have just fired and they simply cannot shoot back at you. You peek over, you plant a shot in a vulnerable point on an enemy tank, you do your damage, you duck back down behind cover for your reload. Simple as that. It's very patient, very passive kind of play style. Might sound a little bit boring, but it pays its dividends in the damage that you will deal over the long course of the game. So, ridge fighting, peekaboo tactics, very good for this tank. It's also really good at corner fighting in urban environments, such as on Himmelsdorf or Angst or even Ruinberg, because the gun handling on this tank is actually very good. It gets 1.7 aim time, which is a fantastic aim time, especially for a tank that is in Tier 7. There's not a heck of a lot of tanks that are going to have aim times below 2.0 at this stage in the game. But those are two very good things going for the T25-2. A couple other minor things. Really good acceleration compared to the Hellcat. It'll hit 20 kilometers an hour faster than a Hellcat will. It might not have as much top speed as a Hellcat, over 60, but it can reach over 50, no problem. The top speed is rated at 56 kilometers an hour, and it can hit that. But on flat ground, you'll see it mostly going 45, 50. And lastly, the overall mobility of the tank, 30 degrees per second track traverse, not bad. Pretty decent turn speed even for a medium tank. And the camo rating on this tank is actually fairly good. If you train camouflage and muffled shot as I did, you'll find that you're getting away with a lot of crap that you shouldn't be getting away with. The muffled shot definitely helped with this tank maintaining its camo rating after shooting. I'll tell you, it was very interesting seeing what I could get away with. So, enough babbling. I don't want to spend too long looking at the packages and the stats and the armor, because the very first game I have lined up for you is actually quite long. So I want to get through these quickly and make sure this video is not, 45 minutes or something. So, looking at the T25-2 bone stock, it gets the same gun as you get on the Hellcat fully upgraded, the 90mm AT gun M3. This first upgrade at the bottom should be either dirt cheap or borderline free, because the only thing it's upgrading is the engine and the tracks. And the tracks will not be researched on any other tank, but this Continental AV 1790-1 engine is a very common engine by Tiers 7 and 8 on a lot of US tank lines. So this package should be very, very cheap, mounting the same 90mm gun. The final package here mounting an upgraded gun, Tier 8 rated tank destroyer gun, as well as the upgraded turret, the 90mm AT T15E2 gun. It's not a bad gun whatsoever. The biggest complaint is the lack of penetration with its standard AP rounds. Looking at the stats, you can see what I mean here. The standard AP rounds have 170 penetration, which, while, not bad, it's not great either, as you would expect from a tank destroyer, because 170 penetration is the worst penetration that you see at Tier 8, for example. I believe it's the Super Pershing that has this. The IS-6 is barely better at 175. There's a lot of tanks that have about 170, 175 at Tier 8, so it's not great penetration, but it's not bad either. You'll damage Tier 7 tanks easily by shooting them in their vulnerable points, their weak spots. Tier 8 tanks, the vast majority of them, same thing. No problem damaging them in their vulnerable points and weak spots. Now, the major saving grace when you're bottom tier or even low tier in this tank is the APCR rounds. If you're not afraid to shoot these, you can rack up some damage because these things have 258 millimeters of penetration. There's just something about US APCR HVAP rounds, as they are called. They have stupid good penetration, and in this case, it's on par with the T110E4 and the STB1 at Tier 10. So you got a Tier 7 tank sporting Tier 10 levels of penetration if you're not afraid to shoot a little bit of more expensive rounds. As I said, the engine power on the T25-2, not bad, 704 horsepower, letting a pretty good power-to-weight ratio. This thing will accelerate pretty nicely. The gun, while it doesn't have good penetration, it has pretty good DPM. 7.79 rounds per minute, sporting 240 average alpha damage with both AP and APCR. And the high explosive rounds can do 320 damage average on a penetration, but they only have 45 millimeters of penetration. The aim time, as I said, fantastic, 1.7. This thing will aim in quickly, especially if you have the proper skills trained and if you have a gun laying drive. This thing will just aim in like you wouldn't believe. And the overall accuracy is 0.36. As I said, the traverse rate on the hull, 30 degrees per second, not bad, and 18 degrees per second on the turret, which is pretty poor, but that's a staple of this line, and you should be used to it by now. And if you're not used to it by now, well, get used to it, because it's not much better with the T28 Proto or the T30 either. So let's take a look at the supplies that I mounted as well as the equipment. The consumables. The ammo that I carried no HE once again, because it just has really crappy penetration. I carried 35 armor-piercing rounds and 12 APCR. I was not afraid to shoot APCR at the hard targets that I knew I was going to face, especially at Tier 9. VK-45 Bravos, E-75s, STIs, things like that, things of that nature. If you're not afraid to shoot a little bit of APCR, so long as you still aim for the weak points on higher-tiered opponents, you will do your damage, and you will get bonus silver and XP for damaging them, especially if your team clutches out a win for you. Consumables, very standard, small repair kit, small first aid kit, automatic fire extinguisher. Very standard, common setup for me to do. The reason why I do automatic extinguishers over manuals is the automatic extinguishers reduce the chance of fire overall before it happens by about 10%. But also, if you do catch fire, it'll put it out immediately. You'll take hardly any damage from the fire whatsoever. Whereas with the manuals, sometimes there's a delay between hitting the button and when the fire actually gets put out. And other times you just don't really realize that you're on fire and you take a crap load of unnecessary damage. So that's my reasoning behind those. Very basic consumable setup there. The equipment, again, should look very familiar. Coated optics. I love having a view range advantage at all times over other tanks. Medium caliber tank gun rammer and an enhanced gun laying drive. And the reasoning for this setup is I didn't really feel that there was anything else worth mounting on this. You could go with a camouflage net and binocular telescope if you're more keen on playing this thing as sniper all day, every day. But I found much more success with this tank when it was frontline or pseudo frontline, being a peekaboo master support tank, and essentially just supporting frontline tanks, so to speak. So there's really nothing else worth mounting on here. You can't mount a vertical stabilizer, and there's really, like I said, there's nothing else worth putting on it. You can't put on vents because it's an open top turret. So that's my reasoning behind that equipment setup there. So let's go ahead and take a look at tanks.gg and look at the armor profile as well as some stat comparisons. So here we are looking at the armor profile on tanks.gg. Another weakness of the T25-2, fairly common down these lines up until the next tier. It basically has no armor to speak of. The thickest plating is 76 millimeters on the front of the hull and the turret. And it's not sloped very well, so you're looking at 100 millimeters effective, not even. Even heavily angled, it's 110. You can get up to 120, but at this point your side armor is very exposed and very vulnerable. And your side armor is 50 millimeters, 38 millimeters in certain areas, so it's very easy to penetrate this tank. A positive about this is it actually has a respectable gun mantlet, though. because the gun mantlet does have armor behind it. It's not just spaced armor and then nothing like on the Hellcat. So there are spots where you'll get, 110 plus with all the spaced armor there, but also you'll get some crazy spots like right here above the gun, 220 effective or more, depending on the angling, because it's the spaced armor plus the turret face directly behind it. So you can get some pretty crazy bounces off the very top of the gun mantlet on this thing. And the turret cap up top here, 19 millimeters of spaced armor, but this does not count as a hitbox. So if a shell hits you here, like an AP shell hits you here, if it penetrates, it will do no damage, essentially. It does not count as a hitbox. So this thing it acts kind of as a pseudo shield for you. So you'll get some funny bounces especially when you're hull down, ducking back behind cover, and somebody snaps a shot on you, and it bounces somewhere off the top of your mantlet or off of your turret cap. But apart from that, do not rely on this armor. It definitely improves as you are using your gun depression, like so. The tank would more or less look like that. You'd be seeing it from about this angle here. So the tops of the gun mantlet, about the top half of the gun mantlet, you're looking at 160 plus effective armor. So you can get some silly bounces. Now the overall stats on the T25-2 as well as the gun constraints. As I said, 10 degrees gun depression, 25 degrees gun elevation. Very easy to line up your shots wherever you need to. And the 10 degrees of gun depression really makes this tank a good ridge fighter. As I said, supporting the front line, your frontline heavy tanks. Now, the saving grace of this tank's gun is that it has good gun handling as well as pretty respectable DPM. 1950 base DPM. That goes up with just Brothers in Arms and a gun rammer equipped. You're looking at over 2,200 damage per minute in the T25-2, which is not bad whatsoever for a Tier 7 tank. You're looking around, you still got less DPM than, say, a Comet or something, but it's better than, say, a T20 mounting the 90mm gun on the T20 medium tank. So it's fairly respectable. A couple other statistics here. We're going to compare the soft stats such as ground resistances and dispersion values on the move with the Su-122-44. Very popular Tier 7 Russian tank destroyer tank. It is a premium tank, but it's a pretty good tank to compare it with. You get way worse base DPM than the Su-122-44, but that is the Su-122-44 saving grace. It has better alpha damage, of course, and you're looking at about the same penetration, 5 millimeters less penetration than the Su-122-44. However, the T25-2 reloads faster and simply shoots faster. It has way better aim time than the Su-122-44 and better overall accuracy, 0.36 over 0.39 or 0.40, whatever it is on the Xbox. The soft stats in terms of terrain resistances are worse than the Su-122-44, quite a bit worse as a matter of fact. So even though the T25-2 moves faster than the Su, you'll find that you're not reaching your top speed as often as the Su will. The Su will easily hit its 45, 47 much more consistently than the 122-44. But you do have a better power to weight ratio, just a little bit, so you'll accelerate pretty good. Better horsepower overall, so that's not bad whatsoever. Now, the soft stats on the T25-2 compared to the Su, they are worse, but not by much. Like I said, this gun has really good gun handling. The aim spread will not be, ridiculously tight, but it'll be pretty damn good. And with a gun lane drive on this thing, it just aims in so quick. You can get shots off almost immediately after you snap your turret around, wait about a second, and then you can immediately shoot at what you're trying to hit there. So that's a look at the armor profile and the soft stats on the T25-2. Let's go ahead and take a look at the crew and module locations. So looking at the images from WOTinfo.net, the T25-2, like a lot of American tanks, you've got the driver on the left side of the hull and the radio man on the right side behind the hull-mounted machine gun. Very easy for these guys to get knocked out as the hull is, as I said, quite paper. The turret on the left side, you've got the gunner in the front of the turret, and probably the commander in the very back there. There's no symbol on that orange area, so I'm going to assume it's the commander. You've got ammo rack in the very back of the turret, and you've got ammo rack underneath the turret behind the tracks, and right behind the ammo rack in the hull is fuel tanks. So shots on the side, very easy to cripple a T25-2. So that's why it's important to not stay exposed for way longer than necessary. Just, pull over, get your shot off if you can, and then pull back behind cover. The back of the T25-2, again, the very back of the turret is all ammo rack, and you've got the engine between the tracks in the back of the hull. So if you take a shot in the back, something flanks you and shoots you in the backside, probably damage your engine, very likely going to set you on fire. Right side of the T25-2, you got the gunner in the front of the turret, it looks like, And in the back of the turret, quite possibly still the commander or even the loader in the back of the turret there. Not sure, it doesn't have the symbol, which is odd. But again, ammo rack back of the turret, ammo rack underneath the turret, behind the tracks, fuel tank behind the tracks, in the very back of the hull. So this tank is very vulnerable to module damage, especially side and rear shots. Not difficult whatsoever to damage this tank. And while I do have quite a bit of praise to say for this tank, I did have my bad games. There's the game here and there where you just get derped by, say, an SU-152 or even a stock ISU-152. Very easy for derp guns and artillery to take this tank out because it only has 850 hit points. That's really nothing to write home about. You've got a medium tank chassis with a tank destroyer gun. Well, more like a tier 8 medium tank gun on a tier 7 tank destroyer chassis, and you have tier 7 tank destroyer hit points. It's very easy to get killed in 2 shots with this thing, especially by really high caliber tier 8 and tier 9 guns. E75s, Tiger 2s, VK45 Bravos, fully upgraded Conquerors, those things, they'll easily 2-shot you. Even some tank destroyers like an ISU-152 with the BL-10 or an Object 704 it's very possible they'll one-shot you with a nice high roll for 850, so there's that possibility too. So the potential for bad games is quite high, but I mean, if you're familiar playing medium tanks especially, you'll find that this tank is actually not as bad as you might have thought. And as I said, personally, I enjoyed this tank quite a bit. So this Prokhorovka game winds up being a long game, and this is a game which is the reason why I was trying to breeze through the stats and everything earlier, because this game winds up being almost 15 minutes long on Prokhorovka here. So on this game, I wind up shooting a lot of APCR. As I said, it's very easy to get damage with this thing's APCR. Looking at the team composition, we are very bottom tier. About 2/3 of the team is tier 9s and tier 8s, so I immediately loaded APCR, expecting to come across a heavily armored tier 9 quite early in the game, so I just wanted to make sure my shots counted and get some damage in. So right away, you can tell even 10 seconds here into this first game, I'm going to go up into the middle, and even though I am bottom tier in a poorly armored, low hit point tank destroyer, I'm still going to play this as a support tank to the best of my abilities. Kind of play it as a pseudo medium, see if I can get some spots by peeking over the center ridge, because I do mount optics on this tank. But for the most part, just playing it pseudo medium-y. Lots of maneuvering in the middle area here, trying to just peek over the ridge, use my 10 degrees of gun depression, get shots where needed. But for the most part, just kind of playing support. And it is kind of a very boring way to play, but it's how a lot of the games wind up going on Prokhorovka, so unfortunately it's just what happens. Snapshot on the AMX 1375, looks like it bounced off his gun mantlet, and very interesting bounce on an AMX 1375 there with 258 millimeters of penetration. I'm pretty sure it went off the gun mantlet at an auto bounce, so an unfortunate start to the game, but you know, it's World of Tanks, stuff like that happens, what can you do? So I tried snapshotting the M41 Bulldog, but the shot dirted right there, and the frustrating factor of that was that it was another APCR round. So I've already shot 2 APCR, and they did nothing for me, unfortunately. Something to note about APCR, shooting it at light tanks. I do load it up for speedy mediums and light tanks fairly often because the extra shell velocity from an APCR round really helps you nail those fast-moving targets, especially if they're far away. It's a lot easier to line up a shot with a high-velocity APCR round than it is with a standard AP round, which could be moving at half of the shell velocity speed. So peeking over, got a shot in the IS earlier, ammo racked him. Got a shot in the Borsig for 250 damage. Got a nice side shot in the Carnarvon. So I'm already racking up a bit of damage really, really early in the game here. 3 damaging shots right away. Looking at possibly 700 damage inflicted already. So just trying to peek over the center ridge, get some spots for the team. Anybody who's able to possibly support me, or possibly just even get my own shots in. Seeing the KV-4, I knew I was going to have a hell of a time penetrating him, so I loaded an APCR, and I had just enough time to finish loading it and get the shot off so that I was able to damage that KV-4. One more damaging hit. I'm easily breaking 900, possibly even 1,000 damage at this point in the game. Bounced a really lucky shell off the T25, and that's an example of either the top of the gun mantlet or the turret cap being able to bounce shells, or basically just kind of protect you. That cap on the top of the turret, it's nothing but spaced armor, and it's not even a hitbox. So even if a shell does hit it and quote unquote penetrate it, it's not going to do any damage. It's not going to do any damage to your HP. So if you peek over a ridge and you duck back behind cover quickly enough, there's a good chance that somebody will only be seeing the top of your turret. They'll snap a shot off at you, but they'll either bounce off the top parts of the gun mantlet, which is at those angles quite well armored. As I said, 220, 240 millimeters at some weird angles. But the top part of the turret, the little turret cap, is a no-hitbox zone. So it's a very good chance that they'll hit one of those two parts of your tank and just bounce off. But as I said, don't rely on it. Maintain a medium tank mentality. Do not rely on your armor whatsoever. Firing a Hail Mary into the E75 and actually penetrating the side of his turret. The shot flew true for 205 damage. One more shot into the turret side of the E75 for 222. Still shooting APCR at this point, as I knew even with my standard AP, I'd still have some difficulty penetrating the turret sides if it was even a little bit angled. I couldn't tell from this far away how angled the turret sides were from my position, so I simply kept the APCR loaded. Also got a nice shot into the side of the STI, so I've already racked up a good probably 1,400, 1,500 damage by this point. Just a prime example of you can rack up damage very easily if you're not afraid to shoot some APCR. So I loaded up some standard AP, peeked over, got a nice shot into the Carnarvon's turret side when he wasn't looking at me. 209 damage there. Peeked over again, tried to get another shot off, but he's just backing up too quickly. And I didn't want to pull forward, exposing myself to possibly that panther that's staring at me from the hill there. So I simply backed off to get unspotted. Didn't want to take a hit this early in the game. I'm still full health, and I want to try to maintain that health as much as possible. Aiming into the panther up on the hill, he gets unspotted, unfortunately, before I could pop a shot off. And peeking over, seeing the STI, just snapping a shot into his turret side there. Not sure where it hit, but it was very unlikely to penetrate from that angle, so it just bounced right off. And at this point, it's just a lot of positioning going on here. I figured I was going to try and get more shots up onto the hill into that STI or the E75. Excuse me, seeing the STI still there, pop off a pseudo-blind shot into the STI with an APCR round. Not sure if I damaged him. At first I thought I did, thinking that he's one shot, but this was actually the E75, so I aimed it on the E75. Tried to compensate for him backing up, snapped my shot off. It doesn't look like I hit him at all in that shot, so I simply accepted that he's still alive. And this is the part where me and my platoon mates were actually getting pretty annoyed, because we've got a top-tier M103, IS-8, Leopard PTA, and Type 61 that were essentially hanging out at the back of the map. Not really being very helpful, so we were getting kind of annoyed. Side shot into the Panther, did not need an APCR in that shot, but it was already loaded, so I just said screw it, fired it off. I was able to hit the Panther in the turret side and damage him anyways, but you know, it helped take him out more quickly, and it kept my two platoon mates over there on the hill alive for just a little bit longer. Excuse me. So looking back to the middle, we see the Pershing is peeking over, getting very aggressive, trying to get a shot off on me, but his shot dirts, and he's taking some nasty hits from the guys that are sniping in the back of the map. Looks like the Leopard PTA hit him in the turret side. So the Pershing's getting torn up as he keeps trying to peek over and get shots on myself and the M103. M103 decided to move up and support us here, so I simply tried to keep tabs on the hill. I knew there was a one-shot E75, and he gets respotted, so I fired my last APCR into the side of the E75, finally taking him out of the game, getting rid of a very dangerous threat that we didn't want hanging around till the later portions of the game. So looking over to the right, the Carnarvon gets taken out by our teammates sniping from the west side of the map there, so that's one less thing to worry about. On my right, I pretty much have no tanks on my right side at this point, aside from those that are in the usual sniping spot down in, F1, G1, that kind of area on the south side of the map. So I know I could just park myself on right over top of this ridge here and just stare up at the hill if need be and get shots where needed. The STI got unspotted, so I simply backed off, remained unspotted myself, as the Bulldog did peek over very far to take out my platoon mate in the Tiger that was next to me. So these are the moments in a Prokhorovka game that can get kind of boring. It's just a lot of positioning. We were up 7-4, and now they're starting to make a bit of a comeback. It's now 7-6. So we were ahead 3 tanks. Now we're only ahead 1 tank. So I decided to reposition, see if I can get a different angle on this KV-4 or this T-29 that's over on my left now. See if I could just get some side shots into them or something. Just get something happening where somebody is getting in some damage and we start taking out these tanks. Another friendly tank gets taken out, so it's tied 7-7. And my platoon mate El Matador also gets taken out. So now the enemy team is actually up 8-7 by this point. So things are not looking good for us. The entire hillside of the map is under enemy control, so there's a very good possibility that there's at least the STI plus another tank moving up from that side. And the only person we have over there to kind of protect it is a Tiger II way back on the railroad tracks. And he does not have the gun depression to peek over those railroad tracks and get shots and damage those guys before they get within range of the rest of us to shoot us in the back. So I simply played very conservative at this point. Type 61 finally pulls up and tries to support us here in the middle, but he's also unable to get shots on targets, like myself, finding it difficult to just get some damage in where we need it to. So I decided I'm going to reposition one more time. The Type 61 pulls back to go support our Tiger II, now that the STI's location has been determined. The enemy Bulldog pulls over, spots all of us again for his teammates, and it looks like the Tiger II in the very back is just getting pot-shotted to death from enemy snipers. So I decided I'm going to pull close to the ridge again, just try and get underneath the guns of any of their snipers in the back there. So I knew this Tiger, this T-29 and this KV-4, they were going to be my primary targets if I had the chance to shoot them. The T-29 gets absolutely wrecked, though. He's down to a one-shot, so I don't think he's going to peek on me again. So I decided to peek way over, really testing the limits of my camouflage rating. Looking at a VK Bravo, no chance in hell of penning that thing in the front. And he was looking directly at me, so I immediately pull back to get back down behind cover. Just avoid losing half of my hit points in the blink of an eye here. So it's at this point that 2 enemy tanks, the STI and the enemy IS, get spotted way on the other side of the railroad tracks there. So I considered going back to support them. But eventually I decided against it, as this M103 would have been utterly alone if I decided to turn around and help out. I figured the Type 61 and the Tiger II could handle it. Pulling really far forward to try and get a snapshot of the T-29. Very poor shot, though. He was well beneath the ridge, so my shot ate dirt. Not a very good shot to take. But luckily I didn't suffer for it by getting 2 or 3 people shooting me and either taking off a huge chunk of HP or outright killing me. Seeing the KV-4 come straight over, I peek over just enough to snap a shot off into the side of his hull, but it doesn't go through. Couldn't quite tell the angle of his hull there. The side armor on a KV-4 is fairly difficult to penetrate for a gun with this much penetration, but if it was angled, which I couldn't tell at the time, it would have also made it much more difficult. So, friendly M103 gets taken out. Not sure where from. Probably shots in the very back. KV-4 peeks over, showing his underbelly to me. Naturally, I bounce off his underbelly because World of Tanks. And this is when the Bulldog pulls up and finally gets some damaging hits on me. I respond in kind with a shot on the Bulldog, but he effectively took off a good 40% of my hit points in 2 shots from a scout tank. And that's what I'm talking about. You got to be really careful how you preserve your HP in this tank, because you only have 850. And something like a Bulldog taking me down 40, almost half my health, 40% of my health in only 2 shots. Really good example of the low HP value that this tank has and how easy it is to get killed. KV-4 coming over, he gets tracked by a friendly, so my shot, which I was aiming for his drive wheel initially, I expected him to drive into it, hits his underbelly and does not penetrate. So my second shot, I make it count, goes into his drive wheel. I figure if he stays there, I'm just going to perma-track him to death. But his track fixes very quickly and he backs off behind cover. It's at this point that the friendly's way in the back there, protecting our backsides from the railroad tracks, from the enemy tanks coming over the railroad tracks. They get killed, and I knew I was absolutely screwed at this point. I'm going to get shot at from 2 or 3 different angles here. So I tried a shot on the T-29, no joy there. and T25 bounces one more off of me. I get the chance to fire one into this Tiger, and hitting his ammo rack. One more damaging shot right before I get taken out of the game by the enemy IS far in the back. So it's immediately after that the rest of our teammates get taken out. Very quick finish for this game. As I said, Prokhorovka sometimes plays like that. It can be very boring in the middle stages. Just lots of positioning and attrition battle. But 2,895 damage dealt. I lost 15,000 silver for that, though. If it was a win, I would have gained a lot for damaging higher tier tanks by far, as a lot of my damage was to higher tier tanks. The E75, the STI, definitely did some damage to them. And I was quite upset with the performance and tactical prowess of our teammates here, so I promptly muted and avoided a couple of our players in the tier 9 tanks, as they were just not really in a good position for that game there, especially the heavy tanks. But it's not about them. It was about me. I felt I did well this game. I was quite content with the performance of that game, just not happy with how much silver I lost. Although, to be fair, I did fire off all 12 of my APCR rounds, and if I hadn't, I probably wouldn't have done nearly as much damage as I had. So that's really good. That game's a really good example of, you can do a lot of damage and still net a fair amount of XP in this tank if you're not afraid to shoot off some APCR. Although, make sure you have some silver in reserve, otherwise you're going to lose a fair bit of silver. So this next game here on Erlenberg, standard battle, much shorter game than the previous one. As I said, the previous game wound up being very long. Major battle of attrition. We're up 3 tanks, then all of a sudden they're up, 9-3 tanks or whatever the heck it was. Doesn't matter. But Prokhorovka games tend to play out that way, and Erlenberg can play out that way too, especially if everybody's playing really campy. But myself and my platoon, we like to be aggressive on Erlenberg. That's how you win games on Erlenberg. So, still platooned with Mistaken ID, El Matador, and Righteous Almond. Righteous Almond and El Matador, both in SU-122-44, Tier 7 Russian tank destroyers, and Mistaken ID in a Chiri Tier 7 Japanese medium tank. So we've got a fair bit of firepower in our platoon here. Myself and Mistaken ID sporting a fair bit of DPM, and the SU-122-44 is having some pretty nasty alpha damage as well at 390. So this game here, I would have preferred to share an urban map showing the abilities of this tank to play corner peekaboo around corners with its really good gun handling. Unfortunately, I did not record an urban game. I simply recorded the previous Prokhorovka game and this one and called it a day at that. Figured that these would be 2 pretty good games to showcase for the review on the T25 too. But this game actually shows the potential for the T25 too in a sniper role. I played very, very far back from my platoon mates. My platoon mates were more than willing to pull in front of me, risking their HP pools and essentially their tanks, risking their potential to get sent back to the garage really early, to get spots for me while I hung back and simply shot some supporting fire downrange with the relatively good accuracy on this gun. .36 isn't stellar accuracy, but it's pretty damn good. Definitely a hell of a lot better than .4 or lower values, let me tell you. So early on, Righteous Almond being really aggressive, spots the enemy Type T34 Chinese Tier 5 medium tank. I'm in a weird spot, so I can't get the gun depression to shoot him. So I'm simply just trying to maneuver to try and get some shots on him. Firing one shot here in just a second on the Type T34. Really poor shot right there. Half of my reticule was the ridge right in front of me. So I simply pulled farther forward, tried to line up my shot. It looks like he's still going to be coming out to my right, just behind the building. So as I see him come out from behind the building, I fire my blind shot, and the shot finds its mark. Very lucky blind shot there. But I was able to just kind of calculate where I figured he was going to be at the speed he was moving and the angle he was moving away from me. Still able to land the shot and take him out of the game there. Really unfortunate for that Type T34 player there to be taken out so early. It's always kind of a burn in your ass when you get taken out that quickly in a game in World of Tanks, but that's World of Tanks. It happens sometimes. So pulling forward, the rest of my platoon crossing the river, being very aggressive as expected on Erlenberg. I'm trying to encourage the rest of our team to move up, maybe get some more supporting fire here with us, but it looks like they're quite content with where they are. So sitting here where I am, I decided not to shoot the Black Prince. His frontal armor is fairly well angled for me, and I did not think I had very much chance to penetrate him. So everybody, myself and my platoon, focus fired on this T25-2 that tried to rush Mistaken ID in the Chiri, but we were able to take him out very quickly. I got no damage from that T25-2, but the enemy SU-152 that gets spotted. Right after I shoot the SU, he tries to blind fire me, but I was long gone for that position. Able to get a second shot into him to take him out of the game and finish him off. Panzer IV small term in a very forward position. Seeing his turret turn away from me, I got a nice shot into his turret side, and then I started shooting for his hull as I knew I could quite easily penetrate the Panzer IV small term's hull armor. So a third shot in the Panzer IV small term hits him in the lower parts of the hull there, dropping him down to a one shot. I try for a fourth shot. It hits the building that he's hiding behind. I try for a fifth blind shot. Looks like it missed completely. It either went high and did not hit the target, or he simply moved out of the way and is no longer there. And this is when the Black Prince turned completely side on to me. So I got a quick shot off into the side hull of the Black Prince, taking off a fair chunk of his HP. And then it's at this point he turns back in my direction, so I knew I wasn't going to penetrate his front very easily. Looking for that Panzer IV small term once more. He did not get spotted initially, but he reappears once again, so I plant a nice shot into him for 53 hit points of damage, taking him out of the game. Firing one more shot at the Black Prince, it goes high and misses, and I decided to load APCR at this point just to make sure I get a damage hit on him. So a nice shot into the front hull of the Black Prince, 252 damage, dropping him down to a one shot. And I decided not to shoot an APCR round until he gets spotted again. Didn't want to potentially waste the shot here, so I kept my eyes on the Black Prince. My platoon mates said they've got the medium tank on the left handled. I don't need to worry about him, so I kept my eyes on the Black Prince. My turret turned towards where the Black Prince was last located. Fully expecting my teammates to spot him in just a second here, and of course they did, so I fire one more APCR at the Black Prince. Looks like it penetrates somewhere in the upper portions of the Black Prince's turret, so able to take out the Black Prince from this game, netting a fair amount of damage from his total HP pool. So we're up 9-4 at this point, and it's at this stage in the game, you know, it's time to just move in and clean up, especially on Erlenberg. There's a very good chance that the last few remaining tanks are going to be very separated from each other. You're probably going to see them in 2 or 3 different groups spread all over different parts of their side of the map here. So I did not get a shot in the medium tank that was spotted. Mistaken ID clips it out with the Chiri, leaving an E25, a Nashorn, a Matilda, a failed platoon Matilda, I might point out, as it is a Tier 4, and a T29 heavy tank. The T29 is way in the north on the other side of the map. I'm trying to coax our remaining heavies and all of our tanks still hanging out over there to just rush it and take it out quickly. But I've got more important things to worry about, like this Nashorn that gets spotted, planting a nice hit on the Nashorn for another 253 damage. So we know there's a Matilda hanging around somewhere over here, but there's been an unspotted E25 that we are unsure of its location, so we knew we had to keep our eyes open. It was at this point the Matilda drowned himself, so we just said, okay, that leaves the E25, that T29. We couldn't see him anywhere on their side of the map, so we figured he's probably over by the T29, and it's right after that realization that the E25 finally gets spotted. So I simply pull out in plain view, snap a shot off on the E25, tracking him for the rest of the team to land some really quick shots on the E25 as well. That E25 just gets absolutely decimated at the moment he gets spotted. It definitely helps that I nailed the first shot in the E25's tracks there to keep him still so that the rest of the team could land their shots very quickly. One last shot into the T29, I simply locked on and pulled the trigger as it was his entire side to me, so I knew I was going to have no difficulties penetrating, even the side of the turret on the T29. So I just pulled the trigger, one more damaging shot, and that's it for this game here. So as you can see, the T25-2 can play quite well in more of a sniper support kind of role. High caliber metal with 2,620 damage dealt, just under 1,500 XP for that game. Not a bad game whatsoever, another really good damaging game. And this actually wound up being fairly common for me with the T25 too, I found. I don't understand why, but games like this, 2,000 plus damage, for some reason, it can be very easy to do in a T25 too, like I said, especially if you're not afraid to shoot some APCR. But this tank is very dependent on the player that is driving it. You might, if you find you're struggling with this tank, you'll probably just struggle through it. It is over 100,000 XP to the T28 prototype, so you might be stuck on it for quite a while. And you definitely don't want to use any free XP, as the T28 prototype is better off having its free XP saved for those stock packages. So you'll simply, if you're struggling with this tank, you'll simply just have to bear with it. Try and play smarter, more like you would in a medium tank if you have any medium tank experience. Wait for enemies to take their shots, then just peek out, line up a nice shot in anybody's weak point, get your damage in, get back behind cover, and wait for your friendly heavies to pull forward to soak shots for you. Anyways, guys, that's a look at the T25 too. I feel it's a very underappreciated tank. It's definitely not the best Tier 7 tank destroyer. It's very underclassed compared to some of the other Tier 7 tank destroyers, such as the SU-152 and the German Tier 7, what's it called? The Jagdpanther, I believe it is. Definitely outperforming the T25-2 in a lot of respects, but I felt the T25-2 was a very balanced machine, and not a bad follow-up from the Hellcat at all. Part of my guessing for the T25-2 getting a negative rep is that it follows the Hellcat, and personally I think the Hellcat is a little bit overhyped, although it is a really good, really fun tank to play. But in the meantime, this has been Mobius Y with episode 3 of the Road to the T110E4. I hope to see you with the next episode featuring the T28 prototype at Tier 8. In the meantime, have a wonderful night, guys, and happy tanking.